and I welcome each one of you for today's webinar. I am Dr. Brototi Biswas from Department of Geography, Mizoram University. Today, we are entering the 76th day of the extended lockdown, or we can also say it is the unlock phase 1. And if we contemplate the past few days, we will see that how society and social norms have undergone drastic changes. Right now, we are having new terminologies. On one hand, we have social solidarity. On the other hand, we also have social distancing. So we just thought that as the dynamics of this social geography in a spatial temporal context is changing, it is getting modified. So let us understand the same from our experts. So our first speaker for today is Professor Tahir Madam. She is the HOD, Department of Geography, Jamia Milia Islamia. She is a well-acclaimed social geographer, and we are really thankful for having her here. I would like to give a brief introduction. Ma'am has been teaching for more than 30 years. She is the recipient of various awards and fellowships. She is having more than 40 publications. She is having 7 research students, research guidance. She has published more than 10 books and 1 dictionary, and she is involved with n number of academic and also administrative capabilities. I welcome ma'am, and without much ado, I would like to request you to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brototi. I would just like to begin by saying a very big thank you to Mizoram University for inviting me over here and giving me this opportunity to talk to everyone and to share the experiences. And I would like to begin with saying a thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mizoram University, Dr. S. Rao, to the Department of Geography, Mizoram University, to its organizing secretary, a very dynamic person, Dr. Brototi Biswas. I'll begin with my topic now, and a very dear, and I would like to say hello on behalf of Department of Geography, Jamia Milia, to all dear students and colleagues from everywhere, from all the universities and colleges, from each and every corner. Thank you very much. I'll just begin now with my PPT. Okay, my topic of today's is concept of culture and the related aspects to it. And I'll begin with a very small quote given by Mahatma Gandhi. A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people. There is no greater wealth than wisdom, no greater poverty than ignorance, no greater heritage than culture, and no greater support than consultation. Culture is a central concept in anthropology, encompassing the range of human phenomena that cannot be attributed to genetic inheritance. In the concept of culture, we are going to discuss about the following: the traits of culture, cultural diffusion, acculturation, cultural globalization. Now, when we speak about what is culture, culture is the values, beliefs, behavior, and material objects that together form a people's way of life. The word culture comes from a Latin word, which means care, and from the French word, which means to till the land, to begin agriculture, cultivating. Culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people encompassing language, religion, etc. According to the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition, culture is the shared patterns of behaviors and interactions, cognitive constructs, and understanding that are learned by socialization. Thus, it can be seen as the growth of a group identity fostered by social patterns unique to the group. According to Christina, an anthropologist, what we wear, how we wear, our language, marriage, music, what we believe, everything, how we greet everyone, how we behave, everything comes under culture. Now, the traits of culture, we are going to understand each one of them how the different states of culture came into being. We have number one, how we learn things. We learn through interaction, through observation, through imitation, which can be done both consciously and unconsciously. And there are various sources of learning. Since ancient times, there have been proverbs and folk tales and folklore. And still further on, if we go on into in-depth of culture, we have poetry, art, music, and in the present modern time, internet and mass media adds on to it. Culture has to be transmitted. It has to be passed on from one generation to the next. Otherwise, a culture will die. It can be based on various symbols. It is changeable. No cultural static. It keeps on changing from one generation to the next. And it integrates. One dimension affects other dimensions. We are continuously having a very impact on all others, continuously. Ethnocentric, a trait which is found in every culture, the belief that one's culture is superior and more worthy than another, which many a times causes problems. We are going to deal with them one by one. Adaptive, in order to survive, culture has to adapt. Now, when we look at the growth of culture, so we can see that migration has played a very important role in the growth and development of culture. If we look at how people have been moving over a period of time, since during the ancient times, there used to be plenty of land and no restrictions for movement, people could easily move from one place to another in search of better environments for their livelihood. Now, one point that has been said that culture is changeable. That means it changes. Now, Walter Browning, an American super sanitarian who lived a very long period from 1896 to 2011, almost 3 centuries, we can say. What did he say? He said that embrace change, even if it slaps you on your face, that we have to embrace change. See, that is culture. We have to keep on changing. And suited booted at 113, just a year before his death, the picture that shows at the bottom. Integration. Integration is very important. If you look at the French Polynesian islands in South Atlantic, we find the choices of races here have been mixed. My father, a French, my mother, a Chinese. Is only one such I've heard. I do not tease. It is just from a poem that I've taken, written some time back. And see, you can see the Tahitian girls. You know, Tahiti is the largest island in French Polynesia, and where we can find how they look like, a mixture of French and Chinese and other races too. Now, when we look at the ethnocentric, the belief that one's culture is superior. So when this comes into being, so then there are problems when one set of people tries to dominate the other one, and they have a feeling of hatred and other things. Like, for example, you have the well-known example of ethnocentrism, which pertains to Nazi Germany, and how Adolf Hitler hated the Jewish people, and many innocent people were slaughtered in concentration camps. So it leads to ethnocentrism, which is not always good, but of course there are other aspects to it. Now I'll be moving on a little bit more into the history so that we try to understand the different aspects of culture a bit more deeply. If we look at the Ottoman Empire, in Ottoman Empire, it was a very huge empire, and the tolerance was much more, which led to its growth at that time. And Sultan Suleiman, the first, he was called the Magnificent, and he was the ruler of the 3 continents. And you can see the yellow color, which shows the expanse of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans ruled the largest, most powerful empire in both Europe and the Middle East for centuries. At its height, the Ottoman Empire stretched from Hungary to Arabia and Mesopotamia and across North Africa. You can have a look at all the regions in the map. Then slowly, the territorial losses took place, and the different countries were formed. The Ottoman period spanned more than 600 years and came to an end only in 1922, when it was replaced by the Turkish Republic and various other states. And these legal positions of the Ottoman Empire are now called with the following modern names. They have become independent countries like Turkey, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Cyprus, etc. And each one over a period of time have developed their own well-defined culture. Adaptation. We'll be going back to the Ottoman again. Adaptation is the dynamic evolutionary process that fits organisms to the environments, enhancing their evolutionary fitness. It is a state reached by the population during that process. It is a phenotypic trait or adaptive trait with a functional role in each individual organism that is maintained as an evolved through natural selection. Cultural diffusion, another trait. Cultural diffusion describes the spread of one's cultural practices, beliefs, and items like food, music, etc. This spread can be among members of the same culture or to completely different cultures around the world. Cultural diffusion is why many cultures around the world share similarities. Cultural diffusion is the spread of cultural beliefs from one group to another. Through cultural diffusion, horizons are broadened and people become more culturally rich. Now, cultural diffusion post-Holocaust. Now, I remind you that when we were discussing about the Ottoman Empire and when its downfall began and when the country Turkey was formed, at that time, the tolerance had reduced to a certain extent, and the Armenian genocide, which is also known as the Armenian Holocaust, was the systematic mass murder and expulsion of 1.5 million ethnic Armenians carried out in Turkey and adjoining regions by the Ottoman government between 1914 and 1923. If you can read a book, which is the name of the book is Orhan's Inheritance by Aline Ohanessian, it traces the history of the last of the Ottoman Empire and formation of the country Turkey and Armenian genocide and massacre. The genocide was carried out during and after World War I and was implemented in two phases. The able-bodied male population were killed through massacre and subjugated to forced labor, and the women were deported and led to death marches to the Syrian desert. Driven by military escorts, the deportees were deprived of food and water and subjected to various atrocities. Most Armenian diaspora communities around the world came into being as a direct result of genocide, or we can say the ethnocentric aspect. Large-scale migrations post-ethnocentrism leading to cultural diffusion. Now, these Armenians, even though they had been traveling to different parts of the world earlier on, however, the modern Armenian diaspora was largely formed as a result of World War I, when the Armenian genocide ordered by the Ottoman Empire forced the people living in their homeland to flee or to be killed. So they went and lived in other parts of the world, and the culture got transmitted to different parts of the world. But cultural diffusion can also take place through religion. Christianity started in Israel, but it is now being practiced all over. Buddhism has spread from India to China and to other parts of the world. And even Islam is no longer contained to one region. It is found in various parts of the world due to immigration. Cultural diffusion can also take place because of discoveries. I've taken certain typical examples, not discussing the main examples because you all well aware about them. I'm talking about, now we are going to talk about the Hawaiians. The culture of native Hawaiians is about 1,500 years old and has its origin in the Polynesians who voyaged to and settled in Hawaii. Polynesia is made of multiple islands, the following, and in 1830, interactions between Hawaii and other Western cultures such as Mexicans, Portuguese, and Spanish began. Hawaiian culture, which was further influenced by Western cultures. So you can see the movement in the map, you can see Polynesia and the location of Hawaii Islands. And this is the Polynesian Triangle, how the colonization took place and also led to cultural diffusion. The end of the 19th century was burdened with internal struggles since Hawaiians wanted to protect their culture and keep power over the land. But later in 1959, the Hawaiian Islands were recognized as the 50th state of the United States. And then, of course, the migration from the mainland US began and from rest of the world. And there was a lot of intermixing. At the height of the Hawaiian population, there was an estimated so many native Hawaiians on the island, but by 1900, the population had dropped due to diseases because the Hawaiians were now interacting with the others, and that led to the spread of diseases, and their population got reduced drastically. Today, Hawaii is more diverse since becoming a state. There are not many pure-blooded native Hawaiians left though. And see, this is how the cultural diffusion took place. See, you can see on the left, the Portuguese immigrants, which brought with them Roman Catholicism and Portuguese language and cuisine. And you can see the Japanese immigrants to migration, mainly because of the plantation, the availability of labor in Hawaiian Islands. And ultimately, you have the intermixing of cultures in Hawaiian. In the beginning, they all tried to maintain their individual separate colonies and separate identities. But obviously, a lot of intermixing took place over a period of time, and now peace prevailed. The earlier on, they were interacting with one another with not so peaceful manner when they were trying to protect their own cultures. But slowly, slowly, the assimilation took place. Now, if you look at the ancestry, we can find, see, there are African, Chinese, English, Filipino, French, German, Irish, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Mexican, Polynesian, Portuguese, Puerto Rican, Samoan, Scottish, others, etc. So many of them, the mixing has taken place. This data is from approximately around from 2008 and updated later on. Now, what is acculturation? Acculturation is the transfer of values and customs from one group to another. Acculturation is the process in which an individual adopts, acquires, and adjusts to a new cultural environment. And this can be done in four manners. How when people interact, what all things can happen. Number one that can happen is assimilation, when individuals adopt the cultural norms of a dominant or host culture over their original culture. Though, of course, many times it is forced by governments also. Then separation occurs when individuals reject the dominant or host culture in favor of preserving their culture of separation. In favor of preserving their culture of origin. Separation is often facilitated by immigration to ethnic enclaves that leads them to live in pockets. Integration occurs when individuals are able to adopt the cultural norms of the dominant or host culture while maintaining their culture of origin. Integration leads to and is often synonymous with biculturalism. Marginalization occurs when individuals reject both their culture of origin and the dominant host culture. Studies suggest that individuals' respective acculturation strategy can differ between their private and public spheres. In public, they have a different image of themselves outside, whereas in private, they try to maintain their own culture. Now we have cultural globalization. Now, when we look at cultural globalization, cultural globalization refers to the transmission of ideas, meanings, and values around the world in a very large scale, diffusion of ideas and cultures amongst all the civilizations of the world, trend that will eventually make all of human experience and customs the same, since all cultures are coming together into one. It occurs in everyday life through communication, electronic commerce, popular culture, trade, etc. It attempts to promote a common lifestyle in the world. Now, when we look at the different house types around the world, we find that earlier on, all the different areas had different types of houses, different types of roof style and everything, depending upon the geographical environment and which needed that. And a unique identity of houses, unique pattern of houses, you can see each one having their own characteristics. But now, because of globalization, now when we look at globalization, through cultural globalization, all cities look the same, irrespective of diverse cultures and varied geographical environment. See, in spite of all that, now because of the technological advancement, now we have a look at all the cities and they all look the same style of buildings and everything. No matter all being done, the final say is that of the environment. Can we identify the Turks, or for that matter, others who migrated to India years before? If you look at this picture, neither will they be distinguishable over a period of time. The people who look different now, over a period of time, they also will not be distinguishable. This is how the culture evolves, it changes, it assimilates, and it moves on, and it becomes richer and richer. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. That was really a very exhaustive overview on culture and the various aspects of culture. We would like to take a few questions.
Okay, fine.
Not able to take all of them. There are quite a lot of question and answers. We will take a few of them, and maybe later on we will take for the next session. The first question has been asked is there any risk or tendency of loss of indigenous culture in the era of mass communication, globalization and migration?
Of course, see, there loss occurs, but when loss occurs, there is gain also somewhere or the other. You know, the knowledge is not lost. Whatever knowledge that the indigenous culture is having, they all will be passed on when they move from one place to another, and the cultural diffusion will add on to it. So it is not lost as such. You know, we cannot allow them to remain like that only. It's not necessary for that also. It is necessary for culture to move on.
The next is how ancient Indian people were diffused by the Western culture.
See, now if we look at India, we find that there has been migrations from different parts of the world. It is not just Western culture that we can say. People have migrated from Africa, from Middle East, from Southeast Asia, from China, from Europe, you know, from every different part of the world, people have come. It's but only since Western influence, because we feel the British had made the colony of India most recently. So that is why we feel the impact of Western to be much more. But in reality, we have been impacted by the cultures of each and every corner of the world.
There's another question. Can cultural diffusion bring threat to any particular culture or religion?
See, it brings now, if you look at the case of Hawaii Islands, or you look at the case of any region, in the beginning, people try to maintain their pockets, you know, they try to maintain their enclaves and they try to protect. But over a period of time, intermixing takes place, you know, intermixing takes place on various fronts. So then obviously, there is no threat in the long run. But of course, in the beginning, it does seem that each culture feels threatened. But over a period of time, the assimilation and cultural diffusion, it takes time.
Thank you, ma'am. There are a whole lot of questions and it is not possible for us to ask so many questions over here, but we will share with you our experts' mail ID if they really want us to, if they allow us to. We will
Thank
share
you.
mail ID.
Thank you.
Then
Thank you very much.
our participants can ask our experts the questions or queries, whatever they have. And now we have been joined by Dr. Benjamin of the Department of Geography, Mizoram University. It is over to you, sir, for a formal vote of thanks. Dr. Benjamin, I think there is some issue with the network in his side. Yes, there is some issue in the network in his side. I'm very sorry for this, but at present we are having some issues with network in the city. So, ma'am, I really thank you for giving us this insight into social geography.
My pleasure.
It's really a great help for the students and obviously the participants. I can see right now there are around 225 participants who have joined us, and by the whole like Q&A sessions which is going on over here, there are a lot of Q&A, which means, and most of them in the chat sections, they are really happy to have such a knowledgeable lecture right now. I'm really thankful, ma'am, for taking time out of your busy schedule, and we hope for further deliberations in future also. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, after an enriching first session, it is time for us to welcome our second speaker and the much acclaimed Dr. V.K. Nayak of NEHU.
Hello.
And sir, in itself, sir, is an institution in social geography. Sir does not require any such introduction, but I would still like to give introduction because that would be a source of inspiration for many of us here. Sir has been teaching for 34 years, and he has more than 150 research publications till date, which encompasses various journals, international journals, and also as paper presentation in various conferences. Sir has successfully guided more than 19 PhD scholars. He has more than 5 books. He is editorial board member of various international journals and also national journals. And he is actively involved in the academic and administrative parts of his university. I would like to welcome sir for this session. So it is now to you.
Thank you, Dr. Brototi Biswas, for your very kind words. There's nothing extraordinary that I have done, except that I have spent a long 34, 35 years interacting with students who are the most deprived sections of India's population, students from the northeastern region and elsewhere. And that has given me the strength as a teacher. And I feel that I'm privileged to have interacted with so many of them who have passed out from this university and have been dear to me. And one of them is my friend Casey. I don't know, I can't see him. He's there in Mizoram University, and I thank.
He will join in a short while.
Okay. He's my doctoral student and has been teaching in the Mizoram University for quite some time now. Anyway, I thank Dr. Brototi Biswas for inviting me to something which is extremely new to me. This technique, this method of presentation, what we now fashionably call as webinar, something which I have some discomfort with this. I've been trying to adjust myself to this kind of a social space that is the most important issue when we talk about social geography. And this is the new social space to which we are now drawn for a very unfortunate thing which has happened all over the world and is now defining and redefining spaces of social interaction. All our traditional social interactions have become untenable because of one tiny microorganism or virus, we call it, which is COVID-19 virus. What is it called? And such a tiny thing has changed the entire discourse, and the techniques that we now employ is something which I'm now trying to get familiar with. This is the first webinar that I'll be addressing, and I'm quite happy that there are so many of you who are listening to me, and that also is frightening to an extent that to speak to so many, and there are now more than 220 participants who may be listening to me, and it's frightening in the sense that you lose the cozy environment in which you talk to a few people and then there are fewer questions, fewer uh, um, issues that may come. But now I understand that there will be 220 odd people, very eminent of scholars and my students and my colleagues from different universities joining. It's amazing. It's also quite gratifying. So thank you once again, Dr. Brototi and my colleagues from Jamia University and the Vice Chancellor and all the organizers who have put in their efforts to make this program a success. I'll be speaking about social geography, which is so very important in the present juncture, particularly in the context of kind of social spaces that we are dealing with. We are the social spaces that we are creating and recreating and producing and reproducing and also addressing ourselves for new as a new method and technique, which I don't think will become obsolete once things are normalized. I think this will continue to be a part and parcel of our human social intercourse. So, well, with this, let me go back to the major issues that I'd be talking about, and let me share the PowerPoint that I have prepared. Is it visible to all of you?
Not right now, sir. You can share your screen.
Oh, I have to share now. Right, just give me a second. What do I do? Share. I've come to share screen, and then
First, open your PPT,
okay.
your desktop.
Sir,
Yes.
at the bottom, do you see the share screen?
Yes.
Please click on the share screen.
Where is it?
Yeah, just click on the share screen first, and it will open a window.
But where is that? I'm unable to
At
get it.
the sir, on your screen at the bottom, share screen is there. So just click on the share screen.
Where is that? I'm not able to get. Where is it not coming?
At the bottom, do you see that mute and start video and everything? Do you see at the bottom of your screen?
No. What's happening? Where did it go? I'm unable to locate.
The please move your mouse, and I think it might appear again. Then at the bottom of the screen, you will see the mute, unmute.
This this one is not coming.
What you can do is you can log out and log in again.
What's happening? Return to meeting.
You can see.
All right. If you are able to see, this is about dynamics of social geography, and I have just tried to collage some of the thoughts that I thought important for sharing with all of you, and they may be incoherent, they may not join together to give a complete meaning, but I'm sure I'll try to jot down those issues, important issues. It's difficult to say everything together, but I'll organize this entire talk into three parts. One, talking generally about geography, and then coming to what social geography is, and finally leading to social theory, that is so very important, and the concept of social space. These are the four aspects that I would like to discuss with all of you. So to begin with, let me speak something about geography and geographers. As all of us often encounter, the dividing line between the natural and social remains extremely elusive as a concept. What is basically natural and what is social? I think all of us as teachers and students often ask these questions in geography classes. And in this context, we normally ask this question. I'm sure a generation of students generally ask this question to me, whether geography is a discipline which is natural or a social science. We are so tuned, we are so accustomed to understand disciplines in these two binaries, whether it's a natural science or social science. There are various reasons for this, because the structure of imparting knowledge has been such that either we consider a subject as social science or a natural science, and there are issues of different kind, whether we go for a natural science or social science. And if we go by this binary of the structure of imparting knowledge in these two areas, then geography as a teaching subject certainly remains most ill-defined, and that too epistemologically. And this has been one of the reasons, and perhaps one of the greatest reasons, which has resulted in the stunted growth of geography as a discipline, and also social geography more so. Let's consider that geography, by very nature, all of us have been professional geographers, and by very nature, the subject lies on that periphery of knowledge where the natural and the human or the social sciences meet. So it's that fringe area, that overlapping area, and that's something which is very difficult in today's world of compartmentalization of knowledge, to comprehend that a subject can be neither physical nor social, neither natural science nor social sciences, but a combination of the both. This is something which is extremely difficult to comprehend, and that has very often created an impression that geography belongs to neither human nor social. And you can see it in various universities where geography is taught. I can cite the example of, you can also see in different universities where it is taught. Sometimes it is clubbed under social sciences, somewhere it is clubbed under natural sciences, somewhere it is environmental sciences, somewhere even humanities. So this has created a great deal of confusion of where we are. But if we look at the history of geography as a discipline, it's quite clear that this subject was designed ab initio to study the social human being, the social man within the realm of natural space. That goes without any contest. And if I am permitted to quote my teacher and one of the greatest social geographers, Professor Ijazuddin Ahmad, he says, and I quote, "The natural factors contributed to the differentiation in the attributes of space and caused the first order of social differentiation within human society. With man's evolving understanding of the laws of nature and his discovery of technological innovations, the grip of natural constraints gradually loosened, while the grip of social constraints hardened. The human affairs today, as in all stages of human history since the Neolithic Revolution, are more and more determined by social factors." And this is something which comes from an authority in social geography and who is a critic of geography himself. And he considers geography to to understand this aspect of human evolution in nature, not with nature, in nature and with nature, and this false dichotomy of nature versus social must be allowed to rest, and geography epitomizes this understanding of how the human beings and human beings as a social force have continuously interacted with natural forces, and this is an evolving issue that leads to a situation in which the natural forces have come down as an explanation for many of the happenings in the society, and how social factors have increasingly become important. The human affairs, as he says, in all stages of human history, and that too from Neolithic revolution when agriculture was discovered. Since then, it is more and more determined by social factors. But the problem with geographers has been their continued reproduction of an environmental theory and a deterministic glass through which they derive their existence. I'm sorry to say this, but this continues to be reproduced time and again, and that's something which we all experience, and I need not give many examples. You can find your own, that to what extent we continue, it's an ironical situation that we continue to say that it's deterministic, and determinism has no role now anymore to play, but we actually in our practice continue to reproduce this same very environmental theory, and continue to reproduce deterministic ideas and pass it on to our students years after years. I again am tempted to quote Professor Ahmad, who spoke in the 15th IGC conference at Thiruvananthapuram in 1997, and he writes, if more geography is done outside geography departments, then geographers will be the last people to be consulted on anything under the sun. It's time to think why we have lost ground to geology, to meteorology, to environmental science, to economics, to social anthropology, and to digital cartography. This is something which we often ask, but we don't have clear answer. And in this context, social geography becomes important, and more of this later. As geographers, we need not be the cartographer of other physical and social sciences, but use our own tools of geographical analysis within the frame of time-space continuum to provide necessary correctives to conclusions arrived at by those disciplines which clearly lack a spatial perspective. It's true that when you ask any student for any topic that they do write, particularly research scholars, when I interact with them, they pick up any topic, and I ask a simple question, but why do you pick up this topic? This can be easily done in anthropology. Then they say, sir, it is for this district. I will do it for this town. I'll do this for my area. Because everything is under geography. We can study anything under geography. And this is what sometimes hurts me, and I often ask them that why do you think, how are you going to contribute differently? If geography, if I'm a geographer and I'm working in geography, a topic is in geography, then it must have something more to say, just as an economist would say something different from a historian, or a geologist would say something which is complementary or contradictory to a physicist, or a physicist would say something which is complementary or contradictory to a chemist. And if this is not done, then the very raison d'etre of geography is at stake. Let's go to the next level after having a critique of geography and how things are not looking good when we do not have an understanding of what we generally consider as our core issues that we take up as geographers. Now, the core issue that I find lacking is questioning. Slowly we are forgetting to question. We accept things out there. We accept a teacher, accept the authority of a teacher. We accept the authority of a book. We accept almost everything in the world that is given to us, and we don't want to question ourselves. But it is the questioning that gives us knowledge. It's not just information that we have to carry on. At some place, Professor Ahmed said that geographers are simply learning alphabets without learning to write a sentence. So it's just like that. We simply learn the alphabets. We simply get informed, and we become the collectors from different disciplines and put them together and say this is geography. The question that social geography asks is, are we dealing with man and environment, or society and environment? Are we dealing these two components, which we always consider as core of geographic understanding, is man on the one hand, or human? And maybe many women may object to this word, but I'm using it for lack of because of its continuous use. I'm sorry. The human and the environment, or the society and environment. If we take the first one, the human and environmental relationship, or we take the other one, society and the environment, do they convey the same meaning? The answer is no. This complex relation of the human beings, relation between human beings and the society, has been in the past theorized in either a deterministic or a possibilistic school of thought. And the worst casualty in this theorization has been geographers' commitment and concern to society. And we need to get a fresh look at the theoretical foundation of human-environment relation and how it has been changing in the course of social evolution. And these are the issues which social geographers pick up as the core issues and as a critique of all of geography, where we need to re-examine this relationship, which will continue to haunt us as long as we continue to reproduce a very simplistic version of this relationship as we have been taught in our textbooks or even geographical thought. Well, I am reminded of one famous statement. In geographical thought itself, the kind of things that we learn is presented as if there are a few notable geographers who produced the knowledge of what we know as geography. And it's exclusionary, it's exclusive that a few bunch of people at any point of time contribute to geography and we learn. And the best example is that of Harshon, who starts listing a number of geographers and who have contributed, and then he finds geographies like this. It's a real differentiation. So this exclusionary ideas that these are the people who contribute to geography, and geography is not has not evolved because of certain objective conditions in the society or kind of social role it has played in different epochs, is something which is never taught to our unsuspecting students, to whom passing an examination is far more important, and by looking at some of the books in which the things are given easily. Let's look at the environmental determinism, which considers the world as homogeneous, undifferentiated, and the social issues are trivial. Environmental determinism obviously was considering everything to be homogeneous. The nature on the one hand, the society on the other hand, and there is a direct relationship of domination of one over the other. Social forces are absolutely meaningless, absolutely trivial. Even possibilistic and probabilistic models are essentially elitist. It certainly released human society from the clutches of nature. and considered there are possibilities which exist everywhere. And it's the responsibility of the human society, the human groups, to take advantage of any of the possibilities remaining is available to them, which means everyone, every human being is equally capable, is endowed with the possibilities, and one has to only pick and choose from the several possibilities that are present in the environment. So the relationship that in either case, whether it's determinism or possibilism, is viewed as linear between a master and the slave. This intellectual tradition has ignored the whole gamut of social problems emanating from man's being a social being. Human beings are never seen as a social being. They're seen as individuals. They're seen as equal or homogeneous. So, and this tradition therefore ignores the whole gamut of social problems emanating from man being a social being and from unequal distribution of means of production and the exploitative mechanism that flows from it. Nearly all major causes of social concern lay within the domain of social sciences, and that is away from geography. Geography has never been viewed as a social science. The basic question that we need to ask is that geographical theory is an environmental theory or a social theory? Is homogeneous man facing an environment or an unequal man facing the environment? If this question is asked and a proper answer is got, then I think we will be far more enlightened. The answer is the human beings are not only different, they're unequal. In geography, we try to present human society, human groups as being different, but not unequal. Different human beings, the differentiation within human society horizontally is of less significance than the differences that exist vertically. Every society, the moment we consider human beings as part of a society, or they have formed a society and they become enslaved to a society, it is a vertical change that takes place because of the relationship that makes some human beings more equal and some as less equal. And the inequality that exists in human society has, and if this inequity in the society is viewed in relation to environmental parameters, I think the answer would be completely different. The relationship will be absolutely complex and not as simple as we see in the two theories that we are familiar with, the theory of environmental determinism or the theory of possibilism. If we view that unequal men are faced with a diverse environment, this is a statement which is loaded with very different meaning than simply saying diverse men are faced with diverse environment. So these are some of the important questions which social geography asks. Let's be very clear, make no mistake, human beings are not only biological beings, they are also social beings. They are a culture group, a community, a population, and an anthropogenic force. So human beings cannot be seen simply as a homogeneous group. That means men and women are the same, the children and the old people are the same, everyone is the same, the poor and the rich are the same, the industrialists and the workers are the same. All of them, once you see them as socially differentiated, their relationship with the environment will become far more complex and not necessarily the same. So throughout the history, some men and women are freer than the others, a view that has been largely ignored by the possibilists. Freedom is essentially rooted in the causal mechanism within society. The society decides who is free, who is not free. It's not nature. If we think of nature making us freer, not free, that is completely different from this kind of causal mechanism that we have to see how society, as I've told you earlier, that from Neolithic revolution, it is social forces which are making these changes far more vigorously than the natural factors themselves, which are loosening the grip with technological evolution, with all that we have achieved through civilization and progress. Certainly, the forces of nature, forces of environment are becoming loosening their grip over the human society. But what fills up these constraints is the social cause itself, how society is making us differentiated vertically, and this differentiation within the human society caused by society has completely different relationship with the environment. Issue of man-environment relationship is not only important to geography, it has been there. Sometimes we say that, oh, human geographers only consider man-environment relationship, others don't, but I don't think there's hardly any subject which can ignore human-environment relationship in their own subject. Anthropology, for example, is another subject which does deal with man-environment relationship very thoroughly. All through the history, emphasis is to understand human beings as a homogeneous category in its interactive dimension. When it interacts with the nature, when it interacts with the environment, we see them as homogeneous and not differentiated. I'll give a small example, if you permit me. Many of the natural hazards, now I hear a lot of people talking about natural resource hazards management and disaster management and all that. How many of them would consider that, and the underlying assumption in such analysis is that the natural disasters do not discriminate. Take the present example, the virus doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone. It can kill anyone. So the rich and the poor, the blacks and the whites, the middle class and the lower class, the migrants and the non-migrants, all of them are affected by this virus. The virus has no religion, virus has no caste, virus has nothing. It affects anybody. So the attempt is to see that everyone is affected. Or for that matter, tsunami will not see whether somebody is rich or the poor. The earthquake will not see who is rich, who is poor, who is dispossessed, who is vulnerable. All these issues is not with the natural hazards and disasters. But I'm sorry to say that it's not true. If you look at, I don't know, we don't have the data to analyze the people who are dying or getting affected by COVID-19, but we have data on tsunami, we have data on earthquake. Who are the people who are most vulnerable? Who are the people who die? Even Katrina killed more blacks. I don't know, if Katrina doesn't go by skin color, then why is it that more blacks died? The people who died during this 2004 tsunami, how many rich people died? The earthquake doesn't kill people with good housing structure, the rich. It's always the poor, the downtrodden, the dispossessed who die. So to say that the human beings are homogeneous is to say the least, the lie that we would like to believe. So that's why I said that all through the history, the emphasis has been to understand human beings as a homogeneous category, as if everything is happening, everybody is equally affected. It's not. Even the gender issue is equally important, men and women. I'm told, I read an article in which it's written that most people who died in Sri Lanka during 2004 tsunami from the same area were women and not men. The deaths, when the deaths were classified into on a gender basis, it was found that women died more. And the reason? The tsunami came, but how is it that more women died? Everybody should have died if a household is affected. The reason being, which we're told, was that women don't know swimming. They are not even encouraged to swim. And the men are better off in swimming and they could save themselves. And also women were little During earthquake, they couldn't come out of the house much easily, quickly, as much as men could do because of dressing. It happened in the night, early morning, not night, but early morning. So these are issues which we do not consider important. And we think that everybody is homogeneous in their interactive dimension. Now let's come to the next issue, defining social geography, how important it is in looking at these issues which I have raised so far. It is a sub-discipline which is most elusive as far as definitions, academic definition is concerned. It evokes more ambiguity than clarity. If I've been teaching this subject for quite some time, and I have not been able to give them, although we have definitions given, but they are not really, they are more ambiguous than they provide any clarity, and that's because it lacks accepted definition and a rigid conceptual framework. It has produced works with different approaches and impasses, and there is no unified theme on which you can say that this is social geography and not other branches of geography. And if we go by the boundary that it imposes around itself as a subject, academic territory, then its boundaries are fluctuating alarmingly. And there is a great deal of nebulousness in the topics covered. Almost every topic under the sun can be social geography, unlike, say, economic geography or population geography. One of the reasons why it is so is because it defies taxonomy. And normally taxonomy is a standard way of classifying branches, sub-branches, species, etc. in sciences. And in academic territory also we can have taxonomy of different disciplines. We begin with natural, social, human, and all that, and then get many branches out of it. Taxonomy of a discipline arises of an intellectual tradition. It's not that it's given, it's concrete, but we because of some certain intellectual tradition, that we create different branches and different sub branches within a subject. And once that intellectual tradition is established, firmly established, then it provides common acceptance of terms and words used. Unfortunately, the subdiscipline of social geography doesn't have this taxonomic luxury, because this is used as a synonym to almost all branches of human geography, particularly, it's human geography, even anthropogeography and cultural geography. We heard Professor Mary speaking about cultural geography, and in America, there's hardly any social geography. They call it cultural geography. So this is how this discipline has grown in different areas, different parts. It's seen as either cultural geography or as anthropogeography or as even human geography. Some even equate it with population geography or settlement geography and urban geography. And such is the situation that this discipline has, subdiscipline is quite misunderstood, or is seen as synonymous with several other branches. But then it's in such a condition that there cannot be any common acceptance of terms and boundary or things which would define a subject more clearly. The subject gets its strength from a complete rejection of determinism and possibilism as a guiding principle. This is the context of development of social geography, and it firmly believes geography as a social science. That's something which is important to underscore, that this is one subject which views geography essentially as a social science and not environment, and rejects environmental theory. It emphasizes and accepts constraints and limitations flowing from the social context. It's all the explanation, the way we explain even distribution of population or even land use, all have to be explained not necessarily from environmental point of view, but more so from the social context. It privileges social context of human action in shaping and transforming space. The space is not seen as something rigid, something inflexible, something of a container, but a much more dynamic, but something that is created, recreated, just as we have created a space today, given a constraint of the pandemic, and we are now using the digital space, using Zoom as a platform. It rejects space as given or geometrical or something to which human beings simply have to adapt or change. the focus is on human beings as a social being interacting with a lived space. The space is part of our living experience. It's an experienced space and not something to be filled in, just as ecologists, human ecologists would accept. So this nebulousness of this branch of geography called social geography is not its weakness, but its strength. Social geography basically, in this sense, is not a branch of geography. It cannot be strictly defined as a branch of geography, but a critic of all of geography, or as an intellectual tradition, or as a school of thought, or simply a social attitude to geography. How much how much we are viewing human beings as a social being, or we are seeing them as homogeneous, as we have been doing so far. It rejects the unreal and fallacious division of geography into physical and human. There's no question of this division, because it considers physical environment as a frame only, and social human as the focal point. It is they who constitute the core, and the natural and physical environment is a frame within which it operates. The explanations in social geography needs to flow from human society and not vice versa. And the attributes of nature or space are to be studied to the extent it's socially meaningful, but not per se, and to the extent it contributes to human welfare. And this is what is general outline within which social geography has grown, not as a branch of geography, but as a critic of whole of geography. And there's a great tradition of this critic starting after quantitative revolution, which excluded social data, or as an intellectual tradition which emphasized on social theories, and as a school of thought, or as a simply social attitude to geography. Now, this brings us to the question of social theory and social geography. But what is theory and what is social theory? Social theory is simply a set of assumptions utilized to explain social life, be that the distribution of social groups across space, the social construction of nature and culture, or the social regulation of political and economic development and institutions. Simply saying, theory is a set of assumptions which is used to explain a subject of study and can rarely perfectly represent the world as it is. Obviously, theory cannot explain the reality as it is. The reality exists where it is, but theory is only an attempt to represent the world as it is. So it's a representation. I'll give an example of how theory works. Taking cartography as an example, a cartographer represents the world. But do they represent the world exactly as it is? No, they can't. They make choices as to what should be included and what can be excluded from a map. That means there is a choice involved, what exactly they are going to represent as the reality. And these choices are informed by the questions they are trying to answer or address, and by the social context in which they are making that map. So cartography is not simply drawing anything and representing every bit on the space. No, a cartographer is also using a theory, and that theory means that they have certain questions in mind, what exactly needs to be answered and or addressed, and the social context in which the cartographic representation has to be made. So that itself defines our theory, that this is how things come and are represented. So in that sense, social theory can be defined as the study of scientific ways of thinking about social life, and it encompasses ideas about how society change and develop, about methods of explaining social behavior, about power and social structure, class, gender and ethnicity, modernity and civilization, revolution, utopias, and numerous other concepts and problems in social life. If this is how we understand social theory, then let's go and try to understand how varied theories and approaches are taken up in social geography, because social geography rejects one size fits all kind of a methodology, that we have one method, one approach, and that will clear all our doubts. No, it accepts different perspectives, different theories, different philosophies in looking at the reality as it is, and each one of them represent a kind of reality, not that they talk about the whole of reality. So each one of them are important in their own way to represent a particular view of the reality. They share common interest in examining inequalities. Social geography as a sub-discipline shares common interest in examining inequalities and differences, but do so in a number of unique ways. It is a constellation of theoretical and methodological approaches that converge and diverge in an attempt to understand and explain the spatial organization of these differences and inequality. And it begins by asking what theory works best with what methodological approach, number one, and what is our purpose of understanding. As I've told you in the beginning, that giving the example of cartography, that what is the context in which we have to understand the reality, and what is the issue that we are addressing ourselves, and which one will be the best perspective that we need to appropriate. Social geographers have become much more interested in being explicit about social theoretical assumptions. We have to start with assumptions. And some of the most significant theoretical perspectives are, I'll just go quickly because I think I'm taking more time. One is, you already know, the environmental determinism, which is a philosophy that this is one way of understanding the reality, a philosophy positing that social development is determined by the environmental conditions in which society is developed. This philosophical position generally fell out of favor in geography in the early 20th century. And the next one is possibilism. This theory, which is attached to the French school of cultural geography in the early 20th century, suggests that while the physical environment offers certain constraints on the social world, humans can modify the environment to meet their needs. Another very prolific theoretical position which is taken is known as anarchism, not something that we understand in the present day world discourse that anarchism means chaos. No, it's a philosophy and a political position suggesting that society is owned collectively, while arguing that societies should eliminate or minimize government influence to maximize individual freedoms through voluntarism. This philosophical approach held limited appeal in geography at the turn of the 20th century, but was resurrected in the 1970s as part of social relevance movements in the discipline, and still holds sway with certain thinkers in social geography today. The next philosophical position is positivism, which argues that research must be based on empirical observations which can be tested, repeated, and developed into scientific laws. Positivist geographers create models and laws pertaining to social and spatial organization of societies through the use of scientific method. Positivism informed a significant amount of social geography for the better part of 1960s and 70s, although the development of critical rationalism modified the scientific method in the 1970s. Then that takes us to critical rationalism as an approach and as a philosophy, which was proposed by Karl Popper in the 1960s, that theory doesn't reflect the real world, which is well understood. No theory can reflect the real world. It is not possible to determine a truth. It is only possible to assess whether or not a hypothesis is false. In the process of building theory, critical rationalists developed a number of hypotheses to analyze whether or not an initial premise is false. Many quantitative social geographers relied on a critical rationalist approach today, testing hypotheses to determine their truthfulness. Another approach that social geographers follow is structuralism as a philosophy, which is a theoretical framework that developed in the study of linguistics and cultural anthropology, which suggests that individual linguistic practices or the signifiers represent underlying socio-cultural and political economic processes or the signifier in which they are produced. Broadly speaking, structuralist thinking began to be used by Marxists, feminists, and other radical geographers in the 1970s and 80s. And of course, Marxism is well known to you as a philosophy, as a method, and as an approach in which political economy plays an important role. And they argue that capitalism is productive of an uneven geography that privileges exploitation of the working classes, limited access to resources in and across space. It was laid by a number of key radical geographers in the 1970s. Marxist geography began with the basic assumption that capitalism structures all social and spatial relations. Marxist geography is still represented in the work of social and cultural geographers today and remains an important political position for many in the field who seek to challenge systems of inequality based in class, also race, gender, and sexual politics. And another very important development as a theoretical perspective in the 70s is feminism, which is both a theoretical position informing a critique of patriarchy and a political position focusing on the politics of equity and equality for women. Feminism entered geography in the 1970s and was first seen as a corrective to the discipline's masculinist narrative. While first wave feminists sought to increase the visibility of women in the discipline, second and third wave feminists now theorize the relationship between gender, difference, and inequality from a variety of perspectives. Two more, although there are many more, but I would concentrate on these last two, that is post-colonialism, which entered as a powerful insight into representation of space, that is based on a specific critique of colonialism and neocolonialism. Post-colonial theory is diverse and encompasses approaches that refocus intellectual narratives away from the center, that is former colonial powers, and toward the margins, that is former colonial spaces. It is also informed by subaltern studies, and confusingly, the term also refers to a period, the post-colonial. Finally, postmodernism refers to a variegated set of philosophical approaches developed in the 1980s as a challenge to structuralism, as well as other philosophies positing that deep structures such as capitalism or patriarchy determine social and spatial relations. As a philosophy, postmodernism has informed a number of theorizations of urban space and the relationship between social and spatial identities. Under this postmodernism underpins social geography's expanded interest in understanding and examining differences. Now, we are all the time talking about differences, but how differences have to be theorized is important. And postmodernism provides us with a very powerful insight as to how really one examines the differences. So this is, if not exhaustive, but certainly most of the theoretical positions which social geography accepts from development in social sciences as powerful insights, powerful ways in which things can be interpreted, the space can be interpreted, the relationship can be viewed, because we just can't view any relationship without a powerful interpretative imagination. And that is what are structured in these few of the philosophical and methodological approaches which social geography adopts. To conclude our discussion, I think in today's world, what social geography's greatest contribution has been is in the sphere of critiquing the space or theorizing the space and its contribution to social spaces. Social geographers theorize spaces as dynamic. Its space is not given rigid framework within which things happen. Human geographers traditionally conceptualize space as a blank canvas upon which human activities are played out, which is an adoption of the Euclidean notion of space and technologically astute attempts to map the way space is territorialized via economic, political, and social action. In the social sphere, this reinvention of geography as a spatial science triggered, as you all know, multiple attempts to utilize census data to identify where residents shared similar characteristics or lifestyles, with techniques of social area analysis facilitating the identification of more or less homogeneous social areas, as we do in land use studies, which we do in urban geography or social geography. We create residential areas which are homogeneous, and there also we assume that, okay, all the people who live in these areas are homogeneous. The same fallacy of considering human beings as homogeneous. While some of this work perpetuated the ecological fallacy, as I've told you just now, implying that all persons in a given area shared similar social characteristics, more individually centered methods of social network analysis provided empirical evidence of the way in which individual social worlds characteristically revolved around a localized set of social spaces, like temples or the churches, there's the schools, or the community hall, or the parks. These social spaces are far more dynamic, and they are more individually oriented to a social world in which they live. And these are the lived spaces which became part and parcel of our understanding. Haggerstrand, for example, and the Lund School offered a different take on the spatiality of social practice, giving some important clues as to how social activities are distributed across time and space. Humanistic geography, as a outgrowth of social geography tradition, explored the emotional and even spiritual ties that bind societies to spaces, albeit often talking about the construction of space rather than the making of social space. Place becomes important. The historical and geographical materialism that emerged in the 1970s ushered in a rather different interpretation of spatiality, whereby space was deemed to be inherently caught up in social relations. Space cannot be de-linked from social relations, both socially, which is both socially produced and consumed. Space is just like any other product which is produced socially and consumed socially. Henry Lefebvre is a very eminent geographer and theorist, insisted that there can be no pre-social or natural space, which we geographers are very fond of. Natural space. One can study natural space analytically by artificially eliminating human forces from the nature, but there cannot be, philosophically speaking, any pre-social or natural space as at the moment that it is occupied through social activity. Because the moment human beings have come, social human has come, it's part of social force, and it becomes relativized and historicized space. All spaces are therefore relative and historicized. Every society and every mode of production creates its own space. So the space is not neutral or fixed or rigid to be filled in, but every mode of production, from tribal to capitalist, each mode of production creates its own space, and that's more important for geographers to understand. Lefebvre further distinguished between the abstract spaces of capitalism, the sacred spaces of the religious societies that preceded it, and the contradictory and differential spaces which is yet to come. Division of the world into a mosaic of social spaces is in no sense natural, but is a process that needs to be understood critically. Social space is essentially a social product. That's what Lefebvre said. Social space is essentially a social product. It's produced as a goods. The idea that space is not passive in the constitution of society is now dominant in human geography, manifest in numerous studies of the conflicts inherent in both the production and consumption of social space. I know much of it is quite different from what we generally understand in geography, but I'm sorry, social geography is such a complex issue. And thank you for listening to me so patiently and I don't know how much you have benefited. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And there are a number of questions.
Please go ahead.
So the first, though there are a number of questions, we will take only a few of the questions. The first question is how phenotypic trait is related to adaptation of culture. How phenotypic trait is related to adaptation of culture.
But I think that's something which Professor Mary should answer. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with social geography.
Yes, yes.
Professor Mary is there, she can.
She has left us.
But this is definitely addressed to her.
Okay, yes, yes. Then there is how can we explain the Northeast culture and livelihood style from the different parts of India?
It's a difference. And every region, every ecology, the response to a particular ecology will have its own culture. But I'm speaking of culture now. I'm not speaking so much on social geography. So that's the main problem. The culture of a particular area is determined by its ecological basis, and also so many other things which Professor Tahir was explaining in terms of culture acculturation, in terms of isolation, in terms of migration and intermingling, and cultures therefore developed in response to so many variants which come in cultural geography. And that's not something which I can really answer, because social geography doesn't deal with culture per se. Culture is seen as a byproduct of human social relationship with the environment.
These are basically all related to social geography only. Then there is one, can we say geography is a linguistic social science in India? When we are discussing geography and structuralism in a single framework. Again, it is from social geography.
All right. Linguistics gave us a powerful theoretical insight, understand the structures, how linguistic structure, and this was taken as a theoretical position of understanding different underlying structures in a society, which we have to go down below the surface to understand these structures like patriarchy, or for that matter, capitalism. All these are structures which are invisible, but they can be interpreted through powerful insights. And this is a linguistic method, yes. It was developed, this philosophy was developed in linguistics, but was applied as a general theoretical position, social theory, in understanding social reality. And space, for example, as I told you, the space can be seen as deeply embedded in the structure of, say, patriarchy or capitalism or socialism. Each one will produce its different structures, spatial structures.
There is another one, how social geography differs from cultural geography.
I just answered it.
Yes.
One way in America, it's by practice, cultural geography is seen as same as social geography in America, but elsewhere it is not. But going by the finer nuances, cultural geography is a byproduct of our social discourse, social interaction. We leave behind many issues of cultural type, and they are more material. It talks more about material culture, and it doesn't talk about groups. It talks about the products of human interaction. So that is culture, which we live and which is learned by others. Whereas social geography is more into social groups. It tries to understand social interaction per se, and not the byproduct of this interaction, which is generally taken in cultural geography in terms of diffusion or cultural artifacts which human society has left behind. And it's more, social geography is more contemporary. It talks about, it involves itself into more into contemporary issues and problems and realities faced by the people, the real people, whereas cultural geography has a bias towards history and how things have evolved. Okay. Oh, I can see Casey. Hi.
Mia's request me to give a word of thanks. So,
Okay.
So there are a whole lot of other questions also. I don't know, but whether we have so much time or not.
Yeah, you can see if one or two can be asked. Otherwise, we can answer them.
There is one question, how introducing new crop or new agricultural technique among the marginal communities, it may impact social geography with the motive to generate more profit and link may impact social geography. How introducing crop or new agricultural technique?
Can you repeat the question, please? I couldn't hear. It's breaking. Voice is breaking.
How introducing new crop or new agricultural technique among the marginal communities with the motive to generate more profit may impact social geography?
It has happened. So one can see it in the context of Green Revolution itself. You can see what has happened in India itself, how the land relations have changed. It has involved, it has encouraged migration. The land inequalities have increased. Social differentiation have increased after post Green Revolution, and most of us are aware about it. Big land holding, the small landowners have lost their land because of, say, for example, most of these Green Revolution technology depend on mechanization, and through mechanization, and these mechanizations, particularly tractorization, couldn't take place in small plots of land. So that led to making of large land holdings, and the small landholders had to sell their land, and it resulted in larger land holdings. So inequality in terms of land holding increases.
And there is one, we will take another question. Often immigrants are defensive of their culture and the hosts exhibiting cultural superiority, which leads to conflict. What leads to such native migrant behaviors?
That's what is explained in social geography as development of subculture and segregation. These are two theoretical positions we take. Most migrants in India or everywhere in the world, you would see that migrants generally carry their nativity to another area and continue to pursue it. And in the extreme partial form that it takes place is segregation and sometimes ghettoization, and the continuity of cultural traditions of the migrant community there becomes partially localized through segregated spaces or through ghettoization. And this certainly results in othering, that they kind of division that comes in a host society. And it happens everywhere in the world. It has happened everywhere. And India being no exceptions. You can see in Delhi, there's so many pockets you can identify with different communities coming from South India or from Bengal or from Punjab. There are segregated spaces, and each one pursuing as if they're mini Bengal or mini Punjab or mini South India, Tamil or spaces. And now there are also gated communities which are developing on community line. So this position is seen more in terms of segregation and ghettoization of community, migrant communities who And there are a lot of theorization on that in Western countries as well as in India.
Thank you so much, sir. There
Thank
are
you.
a lot of questions, but we don't have so much
You can
time.
pass it on. You can pass it on with if they have their email IDs or WhatsApp. If you can send it to me, then we can engage in answering these questions.
Yes. So all of you have heard. You can pass your questions to sir and madam also, and they will be more than happy to answer your queries. And now it is time for the formal vote of thanks. I will invite Dr. Casey sir from the Department of Geography, Mizoram University. Sir, please kindly give the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you, Miss. So, first of all, we are very grateful to all the participants for your, precious time, and it is really encouraging for all of us. And actually, this is organized for the second time by Madame Biswas. So my special thank goes to Professor D.K. Nayak. It happened that he's my supervisor when I was doing my PhD. So actually, I think she also don't know that because I have not yet informed her. So we are so thankful that such an enlightened and thoughtful, always insightful presentations that he even before the other discussions. And I also would like to give special thanks to Madam. She is really an asset for the department. And lastly, all participants, let's have this kind of interaction more and more in the future. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, sir. Especially to D.K. Nayak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you all the participants for joining us today. We do hope it was a very enriching session for all of us. Thank you, sir. And we do hope for future interactions again.